Hi, boys and girls, welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about adding and subtracting rational numbers. So adding and subtracting rational numbers is your title that needs to go on the top of your paper, and then the date goes next to that. Your objective today, I will be able to add and subtract rational numbers. So remember, rational numbers are anything that can be written as a fraction. So any fraction is a rational number. So just a refresher to remember, when you add and subtract fractions, that the first thing that you have to do every single time is to find a common denominator. Then when you add or subtract, then you add or subtract numerators. I add or subtract, so let's add that in. Add or subtract, add or subtract. So remember, it's both for either or. And then keep the denominators the same. So you add the numerators, then you keep the denominators the same. When you add or subtract decimals, the first thing that you do is line up those decimals, and the second thing you do is insert zeros as placeholders if you need them. You won't always, but you might. Alright, so let's work with decimals first, because decimals seem to be easier for you guys this year. So remember, it's the same rules as when we were doing integers. So when you're adding, if the signs are same, you add and use the same sign. If the signs are different, you subtract and take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. Alright, so it's the same exact thing if they were integers, same thing, but this time it's decimals. Same thing. So here's some examples. Alright, so 4.5 plus 6.3. Alright, so this is normal. We were doing this at the beginning of the school year, right? 5.4 plus 6.3. So first thing that we do is we have to line up the decimals. So 4.5 plus, and then that decimal, 6.3. Alright, 5 plus 3 is 8. 4 plus 6 is 10. They're both positive, so that means it stays positive, so the answer is 10.8. Alright, so you see how we did that? We added them up. We knew it was adding because they were both positive, and then it kept the same thing. You just bring that decimal point right down with it. See, it's right down. You need to keep that decimal point the same. Alright, so what if they were both negative? Negative 1.8 plus negative 1.6. So it's the same exact thing. So we know since they're both negative, you add again. So 1.8 plus 1.6. Alright, 8 plus 6 is 14. So 4, carry the 1. You bring that decimal point down. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. We look at the signs as negative plus a negative, so that means that the answer has to be negative. So the final answer is negative 3.4. So pretty self-explanatory, pretty self-forward. It's the same rules that we use with integers, but this time it is decimals. Alright, our next examples is a little bit different, but they're the same type of things. So negative 2.5 plus 10.7. So we know with the rules, with the addition rules, that because the signs are different, we have a negative plus a positive that we have to subtract. So we take the bigger number, the bigger absolute value, which is 10.7, and we're going to subtract 2.5 from that. All right, 7 minus 5 is 2. Bring that decimal point down. We can't take 2 away from nothing, so we have to borrow. That's a 0, by the way, not a 6. 0. So 10 minus 2 is 8. Alright, so we have 8.2. And now we talk about and we look at, well, what is bigger? What's the bigger absolute value? 2.5 or 10.7? I hope all of you said 10.7, so that means 8.2 is the answer because it's positive, because 10.7 is the bigger number. Alright, it's the same type of thing over here. The same type of thing over here. So 9 plus negative 7.4. So we know that it's a positive plus a negative, so we have to subtract. So 9, and we're going to put 0.0, minus 7.4. So with this one, we have to borrow because we can't take 4 away from nothing. So 10 minus 4 is 6. Bring down that decimal point, don't lose it. 8 minus 7 is 1. So this time 9 and 7.4, which one's bigger? 9, so it is positive again. Alright, so I hope that makes sense to you. If we're going to be doing lots more examples in class though, don't worry. Alright, so the same thing happens with fractions. Alright, it's the same exact rules as when you're adding integers, and it's the same exact rules as if you're adding decimals. So if the signs are the same, you add. If the signs are different, you subtract and take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. So here we go. Here's some examples. So, negative 1/6 plus negative 2/3. Okay, so they're the same, the signs are the same, so that means we're adding. So we're adding our fraction. So the first thing that we do when we add fractions is we need to find a common denominator. So some of you might see it and say, well, 6 and 3, I know that I can make both of my common denominators 6. So 6 is my common denominator. Okay, and then this is going to stay the same because it's 1/6. We kept that the same. And I'm going to keep those negatives there just so we don't get confused. And then 3 times what equals 6? Well, and you ask yourselves, 3 times 2 equals 6. So whatever we do with the denominator, we have to do the numerator. So 2 times 2 equals 4. So negative 1/6 plus negative 4/6 is equal to, so you go 1 plus 4 is 5. And we keep that sign. So our answer is negative 5/6. Negative 5/6. Some of you might have wanted to do 6 times 3 to find your denominator. That's perfectly fine. You could have used 18. You just would have had to reduce. Alright, let's look at this other example. 5/8 plus negative 3/4. Okay, so we need to find a common denominator again. That's the very first step, find a common denominator. So we're going to use 8. If you use 32, that's fine. You're just going to have to reduce more at the end. So we're going to keep this one the same. 5/8 is the same because we're just bringing it right down. 4 times 2 equals 8 times 2. So that means we have to do the same thing in the numerator as we did in the denominator. So 3 times 2 is 6. Okay, so we have 5/8 plus negative 6/8. Okay, so now we know that the signs are different. So we have to subtract. So this was just finding, this part right here was finding equivalent fractions so our denominators were the same. Now we need to follow the rules that we followed in this entire unit so far. So since negative 6/8 is bigger, we need to go 6/8 minus 5/8 is equal to 6 minus 5 is 1. You keep the denominators the same. So which one's bigger, 6/8 or 5/8? I hope all of you say 6/8, so it's negative 1/8. Our next example is negative 1/2 plus negative 3/4. So the signs are the same. We're going to add, oopsie, we need the pen tool. Okay, the signs are the same. We're going to add, what's the common denominator? Well, a common denominator that you might see right away is 4. So 4 is our common denominators, and we're going to keep these negatives here just so we don't forget. We're going to keep 3/4, just bring it right down because we're not messing with that one. It stays the same. So then we ask ourselves, 2 times what equals 4? Well, 2 times 2 equals 4, so whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. So negative 1 times 2, I'm sorry, just 1 times 2, we'll get into that later. 1 times 2 is 2. So now we have negative 2/4 plus negative 3/4. So now we know how to do this. 2 plus 3 is 5, and negative plus a negative is still a negative. So negative 5/4. Well, that's an improper fraction, so you have to ask ourselves, how many times is 4 going to 5? Just once, and then there's 1 left over. So the answer is negative 1 1/4. Negative 1 1/4. Okay, so there we go with that one. So subtracting positive and negative decimals and fractions are exactly the same as what we were working on with integers. So you're adding the opposite. Or keep, change, opposite. We've been working on this so much. So keep, change, opposite. So here's some decimal examples. So 4.5 minus 6.3. So 4.5. So let's rewrite it. 4. So we're going to keep, we're going to change, then minus to a plus, minus to a plus, and then the opposite of the last one. So 6.3, the opposite of 6.3 is negative 6.3. So now we have 4.5 plus negative 6.3. So we know, because the signs are different, we need to go 6.3 minus 4.5. We need to borrow. 13 minus 5 is 8. Bring down that decimal. 5 minus 4 is 1. Which is the bigger number? 6.3 is, so that means it's negative. Negative 1.8. The same thing with this one. 2.5 minus negative 6.5. So 2.5, we're going to keep that. We're going to change that minus sign to an addition sign, and we're going to take the opposite of negative 6.5, which is positive 6.5. So now we just add 2.5 plus 6.5. 5 plus 5 is 10. Carry the 1, bring down that decimal. 2 plus 6 is 8, plus 1 is 9. So the answer is positive 9. And the last examples that we have is our fractions. So negative 1/6 plus negative 2/3. That should be a minus. We've already done those ones. Oops. So do me a favor and change this to a minus. And this one to positive. So here, I'm just going to rewrite that for you. Negative 1/6 minus 2/3 is what it should be. Negative 1/6 minus 2/3. All right, so then when we rewrite that, it should be keep the negative 1/6, change the minus to a plus, take the opposite of positive 2/3, which is negative 2/3. All right, so now we need to find a common denominator. So we have negative 1/6 plus negative 2/3. Well, we can see that we want to use 6 because 6 is a common denominator. We're going to keep that negative 1/6 the same. We're going to add, so 3 times 2 is 6. So we need to go 2 times 2, which is 4. So 1 plus 4 is 5. We're going to keep those negatives, negative 5, 6. And then our last example that we're going to do is 5/8 minus 3/4. All right, so we go 5/8. We're keeping the 5/8 the same. We're going to change the minus to a plus, and we're going to take the opposite of, we're going to take the opposite of 3/4, which is negative 3/4. So we have 5/8 plus negative 3/4. All right, so we need to find a common denominator. So we know that a positive plus a negative we're going to have to subtract, but we don't know what order that's going to be in yet. All right, so what I would suggest is just find their common denominators. So 5/8, we're going to use 8 plus, so 4 times 2 is 8, 3 times 2 is 6. So 5/8 plus negative 6/8. So we know that the 6/8 needs to be in the front. We're subtracting. So 6/8 minus 5/8 is equal to 1/8. What is bigger, 5/8 or 6/8? The 6/8 is bigger, so it needs to be a negative. So negative 1/8. Alright, so remember, you must have 2 questions about this video to earn full credit. A lot of people are missing that step, and that's not good. I'm going to keep getting you those 8 out of 10s. And just for your information, your notes should look something like this. And by something like this, you need to have Cornell style. So if you did not do that, you need to take the time and fix them right now. So thank you so much for actively listening. I hope this was informational and informative, and I will see you in class. Bye-bye.